If you want your animation to look good, you need to understand how bodies react to movement. Without going into crazy detail, let's look at some really interesting stats. It takes 43 muscles to smile. A single push-up involves a variety of muscles, including the pecs, triceps, upper back muscles, deltoids, and the core muscles in your abdomen. As an animator, you don't necessarily need to know anatomy to this extent, but you need to understand that there is no isolated movement in the body. Even the simplest action triggers a chain reaction. So from now on, no more of this. We're going to look at how you should actually approach sculpting any character pose so that everything feels nicely connected. It goes without saying that you should be using a reference when sculpting poses, but I'm not going to use one right now because I won't be creating any specific pose. What I am going to do though is use my own body and do the motion myself as I'm explaining it to you. We strongly recommend doing this anytime you animate because you can really feel the different parts of the body affecting each other. You get much more information than from just looking at a flat, two-dimensional image. Okay, so we have a file with Max here, and I'm just gonna do different things and show you how I would approach making everything feel connected. So for example, let's say that Max is gonna be lifting his arm above his body. Maybe he's going to be waving someone or whatever it may be. Okay, so this would be your standard wave pose. But as you can see, I've only moved the arm so far. I've moved the wrist and I've moved the elbow. But that's not enough to make this look good. Try this with me. Just lift your arm above your body. Do it several times and just see what you're feeling. I can feel my shoulder blade moving. I can feel some muscles on my back moving and helping, and my shoulder lifting, and so on. And we don't have those muscle groups on Max, and nor should you actually be animating that, but we do have body parts that get affected. So right away, whenever the arm lifts, I know that the shoulder gets affected. So you can either use a little bit of rotation or translation or just a combination of both. And you don't have to go too crazy, you can keep it subtle. The higher the arm goes, the higher the shoulder will go as well. But because the arm isn't super high right now, we don't have to go too far with the shoulder. Another thing that gets affected by the shoulder being higher is the chest. So what I should do is grab the chest and rotate it slightly this way. And I have this higher chest controller and I can do a little bit of that here as well. And for counterbalance, because we usually want to keep our head straight, what you can do is grab this neck controller and just bring it back a little bit. And if you want, you can also add a little bit of angle to the head. It also makes it a little bit more interesting than if it's just completely straight. And now because we've moved everything kind of to the left, like the whole spine is leaning a little bit towards the left, we might also need to counterbalance it a little bit. So you would grab the cog and just move it just ever so slightly to the right. Because you don't want Max to feel like he's not balanced and he's about to fall over to the left. And of course this is very subtle, so he wouldn't really look like he's fallen over, but the more extreme you go with these poses, the more obvious you should make this difference. Okay, let me undo that just to show a different pose. Now let's say Max heard something happening behind him and he's turning his head to see what's going on. So naturally, you want his head to be turning. And usually your eyes turn more than your head. So maybe he's gonna be looking at it from the corner of his eye. You know that your chest is going to for sure move as well, because your head can move left and right on its own, but the range of motion isn't so extreme like, for example, an owl has, where you can just move your head independently without moving the rest of your body. So let's rotate this chest, and it will rotate quite a bit actually. And the more you rotate it, the more room you have to rotate the head even more. So if you feel like your head wasn't turned quite enough, but it was starting to look like the pose is breaking, that might be the reason why. You just need to rotate the rest of the body more. The cog would also rotate, but not as much as the chest and the head. And often when you turn towards something, you also shift your balance. So I feel like the cog might move a little bit this way and back. And usually you would also shift your balance on your feet a little bit. Just to keep the balance, because whenever you move the cog, there's a weight shift happening and your feet are the ones that help you keep your balance. And you don't want your arms to stay frozen in place. Usually when the chest moves back, the arm would also move back, even if it's just a little bit. And since the arm is just a little bit higher now, the way I put it, I'm also gonna move the shoulder just a little bit up. And don't forget about the other arm. Again, you don't want it to be stuck in place. It's gonna do the opposite of what the other arm did. We can transfer the weight a little bit more on one leg. And this also makes the pose look more interesting if he's not just completely balanced 50-50 on each leg. And because we transferred the balance to one leg, we also have to rotate the pelvis up. So you know this from the couple of walk cycles we've done already, that the leg that's holding most of the weight has the pelvis going up. You can also see that the pelvis is facing this way, but the legs are facing a little bit this way, so I'm just gonna rotate it a little bit to make it look a little bit more natural. And now I'm looking at Max's zipper, and you can see there's a little bit of an unnatural bend here. And that's because we haven't moved any of the middle controllers on his body. It looks like his belly is facing one way and his chest is facing the other way, but there should be a gradual twist happening in the body. So I'm going to turn on these tweakers, and I'm just gonna rotate them one after the other until I get a nice smooth curve. So you can still see in this camera view that there is a little bit of a twist happening in the body, but now it doesn't look broken anymore. And we've mentioned a few times that you should look at your poses from all angles to make sure they look good. And from the front, it's looking better, but here from the side, you can see that he looks like he's leaning forward a little bit. So I want to fix that. So I'm gonna grab the cog, bring it back a little bit, and his whole upper body looks very stiff right now. So I'm gonna start giving it a little bit of an angle, and because he's leaning towards the source of the sound, we're gonna actually add a little bit of angles there too. So maybe his chest is rotating this way a little bit, and on the x-axis, it's rotated that way. Now I feel like, again, the feet are not giving me as much balance as I would like, so I'm gonna push this foot a little bit back and rotate it a little bit. So it's, again, every time I do something, there is a chain reaction in the entire body, and I might have to adjust more and more until I arrive at a pose that looks appealing, makes sense, feels balanced, has a good silhouette, and so on. So yes, it takes a while to sculpt these poses, but the good thing is that if you really take your time to make these keys, breakdowns, and all your golden poses really beautiful, you're in full control of your animation, and you know that once you finish and polish your work, it's going to look beautiful. On the other hand, if you just half-ass the poses and you don't take the time to make everything look great and balanced from all the angles, then the more you go down the line, the worse it's gonna look, right? So you want that really solid foundation that looks really good, and that really does take time. Okay, so now that I rotated the chest, this arm doesn't feel very natural anymore. So I'm just gonna compensate, bring it back like this. And this arm might feel just a little bit too straight because we're leaning now this way. And because everything is leaning this way, we might want an opposite angle on the head. And we can turn it a little bit more as well. Bring the eyes down a little bit. And you can see how different this pose is from when I just had the head rotated back and I didn't have anything else there. Of course, it could look much better. Like, I could actually now start thinking about the silhouette and give space between the feet here. And then my hand poses are terrible right now, so I would want to make sure they look nice. But I'm not going to go all the way into those details right now. If you want a full completed animation of something like a turn, you can look at the Stranger Things animation I did of Max and just go frame by frame and see how I would approach it. Something else I'm just going to do quickly is grab the neck and push the neck back a little, and it's leaning as well in that direction. So usually, even for something as simple as your head turning back, you can see that all the main body parts get affected. And you don't always need to animate the little controllers like these tweakers on the neck, or these shoelaces, or even something like these leg controllers, because those are just for fine-tuning your poses and detailed sculpting. But you almost always want to move all the main body parts like the head, the neck, the shoulders, the chest, the spine, the hip, the cog, the arms and the legs and the feet. Usually you'll have everything working kind of together to create that pose. Again, I'm not going to be sculpting full beautiful expressions at all because that's going to take me a while, but we do have videos like our Max Rig preview where you can actually see me sculpting the poses in real time, just sped up. And if you want, you can go through that and see how a full pose would be made from beginning to end. So let me zoom in. For example, let's do a quick smile. So I know that the corners of the mouth will be going up. And already it kind of looks like a smile, but at the same time, it looks very neutral and stiff and actually kind of creepy. And that's because no other muscles are being involved in this smile besides just a few muscles around the mouth. So a couple of easy, quick things you can do right away is whenever you smile, and you should do it yourself, just touch your face, touch your cheeks, and you can feel them going up every time you smile. And we have these nice cheek controllers right here. So just grab those and just bring those up. And everything here on the face gets affected, including your nostrils. So you want to grab those nostrils and bring them up a little bit. Just be careful, you don't want to make it look like a sneer if you go too far. You just want to be very, very subtle. And we can't forget about your eyes. Your eyes get affected too. So you want to grab the lower eyelids and just bring them up a little bit. And we also have these lower eyelid region controllers that you also need to push up. And because a smile is a compressed pose, so when you think about expressions in terms of squash and stretch, something like a scream or a scared surprised pose with the mouth open would be a stretch pose, but something like a smile is more compressed. Everything is kind of being squeezed together. So you can grab this jaw stretch controller and just very slightly bring it up. And I also like doing a little bit of side to side, and this is a different lesson entirely, but it is appealing to have asymmetry in your face and in your poses. So I never like to keep my face completely symmetrical. I like to add a little bit of asymmetry to it. And you can do that using the face upper and face lower controller and just add a little bit of angle to it. And the opposite angle to the bottom. And then right away, it looks a little bit more squished on this side. But now that it's more squished on this side, I also want to have this eyelid a little bit higher than on the other side. And this other controller here as well. The cheek might be a little bit higher. And to support that, I'm going to make sure that this side of the mouth is higher than the other one. And I'm getting a very strong shadow under the eye right now. So I'm just going to pull this controller out a little bit. What you can also do is grab this eye region controller and just scale it in X. And that gives additional compression to that eye. You can add a little bit of that on the other side as well. And then your eyebrows, they can be a little bit more independent in this case, and you can do whatever you want with them. They can be going a little bit higher, or they can be going lower for a more evil pose. It really depends on what you're doing. But you gotta keep in mind that if your eyebrows go lower, and this pose might not make sense, but that's fine. You wanna make sure that your eyelids are also pushed down a little bit. And this eye upper region controller does that too. And then on the other hand, if the eyebrows go really high up, just try it yourself. Like if you raise your eyebrows, it feels very unnatural trying to keep your eyes closed like this or squinting. So usually that will pull your eyelids up as well into a more surprised pose. And naturally, these controllers will go up as well. And a lot of people, including myself, like having asymmetrical poses on the eyebrows. But the problem is that a lot of people do something like this. And I don't know if you can tell, but the eyebrows right now aren't connected at all. They feel very independent from each other. But you have to realize that this whole upper face works together. The muscles always work together. And they can't be isolated like this. Unless you're Jim Carrey and you're able to do very extreme poses with your face, you might want to avoid that. So what you should do is grab these inner controllers and just bring them together a little bit. And rotate your whole eyebrow to kind of work in that direction. So now that I rotate this controller, my whole eyebrow is going to get a little bit of a wave. And you can see that wave is kind of leading into the other brow. And I can do that with this one too. And now they're not fully connected, but you can see one of them is clearly lower than the other, but it still feels like they're flowing one into the other. You can draw a single line going from one to the other, and that might not always be the case, but you never want them to feel like they're completely disconnected from each other. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And then the eyelids should follow. So this eyelid is pretty open, and then I'm gonna bring this one and just bring it lower. But you want to be very careful because that can look really odd really quickly, especially if you have white above one eye and not above the other. That looks weird. So you still want to cut the pupil with the eyelid, but you still want to keep that asymmetry on the eye. And we're going to go into more detail in a separate lesson about asymmetry, so don't worry about that too much, but everything is now leaning one way. The nose should also follow. So I can draw a nice curved line through the face, being the line of action, and the nose doesn't feel like it's out of place. Like if it was this way, you can see that now it doesn't work and Max looks broken because the nose is going this way, but the rest of the face is going that way. And the last thing I want to look at is the hand. So for example, let's say that you have the hand in a fist and then you go to point at something. So first of all, we need to have this finger pointing. But again, just do it with your own hand. Just keep the fist very tight and just extend your index finger. It feels very painful if you try to keep your other fingers completely still, right? So you do need to have a little bit of fanning on the other fingers, meaning you want to grab the second finger, which is the middle finger, and just open it up a little bit. And you want to do the same on the ring finger. And then the pinky can probably stay where it is, but can you tell that it looks more natural now? And it also looks more appealing when there's a little bit of a shape happening, and if you just look at the silhouette, you can see the individual fingers instead of them all being on the same plane. See, this doesn't look very good, and this looks much better. And it's all about the tendons in your hand when you think about it. They're all going from your fingers to your wrist, and you can really feel it when you try to keep the hand really closed and just extend the index finger. And of course, you want to make sure that your thumb is nicely resting on the rest of the hand and it's not hovering in the air, and so on. But this is the main point. And actually, one more quick thing, because I feel like a lot of people don't understand this. If you have your back and your legs firmly against the wall and you try to bend forward, you are going to fall over. And that's because whenever you bend forward, now you have all of this weight, which is probably like half of your body weight, here in front of your legs. And there's just no way that you can keep this balance without falling over. So what you do need to do is take the cog and bring it back. And usually also you don't want the feet to be just completely straight like this. Having them fan out like this and maybe a little bit farther apart helps you have better balance. But the main point is that your center of gravity, which is what cog stands for, it needs to be pushed back like this. So that's kind of a fun little exercise you can do to remember how this works. Just to see how it works in practice, let's look at this animation from Frozen 2 and just analyze it a little bit. So what I want to be looking at is this part with Elsa being pushed forward by those spirits. So I'm just gonna go frame by frame. So here she is looking in one direction and she sees this little spirit, it catches her attention and she's turning, and you see that her whole body is turning towards it. It's not just the head, but there is a little bit of a delay. So the head turns first and then the body turns. And you can see that the arms are also turning, like what we talked about, because they can't just stay frozen in place. They're attached to the shoulder, so they have to follow with the chest. The arm is lifting up, and you can see the shoulder lifting up as well. And there's a little bit of drag on the hand. And do you see how the weight is being shifted to one side because she's looking back and she's kind of trying to avoid getting hit by this little spirit? And you see her chest turning and it's going up and it's rotating sideways. Not only this way, but also this way. And here she's being pushed forward in her lower back area, but it affects the whole body. So her arms go up, Her head rotates up, her shoulders go up, and she's losing balance. And because her lower body is leaning one way, her upper body is now leaning the other way because it wants to keep that balance. She's not trying to fall. So that's, again, that C curve we talked about. And not only it looks appealing, it also helps her stay on her feet. And you can feel the hip being up on this side. That's the contrapposto that you always hear about as an artist. The hip going up one way and then the shoulders going down the other way. And here you can see her body rotating. In this case, it's interesting because her head is staying pretty still while the chest is rotating. But the reason why that works is because we are able to lock our heads on a target. Like what you see in those crazy videos with chickens where the head looks like it's in IK mode, just a lot less than that. But she's focusing on something she's seeing and her body is catching up because she's about to start running. But even then, you can see that there's just a little bit of micro movement on the head. It's not just completely frozen in place. So even if your motion is very subtle, there should still be some. You should never have the pixels locked in one spot. And one last thing I want to look at is breathing. So you would think that when you're taking a breath, it's not really visible on the body unless it's a really deep breath. But if the rest of the animation is very subtle and the character isn't doing much, then the breath will be a lot more visible. So here, even though you don't see Elsa's face and you don't know if she's taking a breath, you can clearly tell that she is. And that's because of the shoulders and the chest working together. And not only that, but the spine is also getting affected by the breath. So you see that as she's breathing in, the shoulders go up, the chest expands, and that's when the spine goes up as well. With the inhale, when you do it yourself, you can feel your whole spine kind of going back a little bit. And then as she exhales, the opposite happens. The shoulders go down and the spine goes forward again. It doesn't stay as rigid and straight as it was before. So that's something interesting you can think about. And if you want to know more about breathing, we've made this breathing infographic with May that you can analyze by yourself. Okay, so I hope you get the idea. Just remember that no body part can ever be isolated in its motion. Even if the chain reaction is subtle, you should still have at least a bit of movement to make the body feel connected. So just remember that no matter what pose you're sculpting, you want to be posing all of the body parts. You don't just want to pose one or two. And you can also grab any of your favorite 3D animations and just analyze them frame by frame like we did just now and see how other animators deal with body mechanics. And then go ahead and apply your new knowledge to your own work. And if you come across anything interesting that you've discovered, feel free to share it with the rest of the class. Thank you for watching.